The king who was afraid of his own skin, extended version, 1 to 2 hours. There is a specific kind of contradiction that history rarely lets a single person embody this completely. Not the hypocrite who says one thing and does another out of simple convenience. The man who genuinely, sincerely believes two entirely opposite things about his own body at the exact same time, and spends decades trying to reconcile them without ever quite managing it. In 1534, Henry VIII of England was the single most powerful man on his island. He had broken with the Pope in Rome. He had married Anne Boleyn. He had declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and he owned something that almost nobody else in his entire kingdom could claim: a bathtub with both hot and cold running water. That might sound like a minor domestic detail set against the scale of reshaping an entire country's religious foundations. But in Tudor England, where physicians genuinely believed that hot water could open a person's pores and let deadly plague seep directly into the blood, a king who insisted on regular bathing was doing something quietly radical. Something his own doctors would have told him, in all medical sincerity, was dangerous to his life. That was 1534. By 1547, the year Henry died, his own physicians were prescribing those same herbal baths as medicine for his rotting leg wounds. The exact thing his doctors once genuinely feared might kill him had become the thing they eventually hoped might save him. This is the story of that contradiction, of a king caught for his entire adult life, between his instinct for cleanliness and his terror of disease, and of the strange, engineered, deeply human compromise he built to survive inside that contradiction. Part 1. A cardinal's gift and a king's obsession. To understand why Henry VIII built one of the most advanced private bathrooms in 16th century Europe, you first have to understand how he came to own the palace it was built inside. The estate that changed hands to save a life. In 1529, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey handed over his beloved estate of Hampton Court to the king in a desperate attempt to save his own political standing, after failing to secure Henry's long-sought divorce from Catherine of Aragon. The gesture did not work. Wolsey would be dead within a year, disgraced and stripped of most of his offices. But the palace he surrendered would go on to become Henry's favorite residence for the next 2 decades, and one of the very first construction projects Henry commissioned after taking possession was something genuinely unusual for the period: a private bathhouse. The building records that survive in unusual detail. The surviving building accounts from Hampton Court between roughly 1529 and 1538 are remarkably thorough by the standards of the period. They record not only what was physically constructed, but the individual names of the workmen involved, and precisely how much each of them was paid. Among the specific construction projects listed was a structure known as the Bain Tower, the name derived directly from the French word for bath. This was a 3-story tower housing, among other functions, the king's own council chamber, his private bedroom, a library, a jewel house, and on the first floor, his private bathroom. The mechanics of a Tudor luxury, a furnace located in the room directly next door, heated water that flowed through lead pipes into a circular wooden bathtub. The surrounding walls were decorated with paintings by an Italian court artist named Antonio Toto del Nunziata. The tub itself was lined with sheets of white linen, not primarily for comfort, but because untreated wood had a well-documented habit of producing splinters in places nobody particularly wanted them. The genuinely remarkable engineering achievement, though, was the plumbing itself. Tudor engineers had laid a lead pipe running from a natural spring, located more than 3 miles from the palace. That pipe ran underneath the riverbed of the Thames, using gravity alone to generate sufficient water pressure to force fresh water up 2 full stories into the king's private bathroom, with both hot and cold water flowing from entirely separate taps. The surviving building accounts confirm this arrangement in specific technical detail. In a country where the overwhelming majority of ordinary people hauled every drop of their water from wells in wooden buckets, Henry VIII had access to something functionally closer to a modern bathroom than most Europeans of any social class would see again for roughly the next 300 years. Part 2. A king terrified of his own body. So why would a reigning monarch go to this level of expense and engineering effort purely for a bath? The answer has as much to do with genuine fear as it does with simple vanity or luxury. A hypochondriac in the most literal sense, Henry VIII was a hypochondriac, not in the casual, modern sense of the word, but in a very real, life-altering, decision-shaping way. He had grown up watching disease repeatedly ravage his country, and one illness in particular haunted him from the moment he first took the throne, the sweating sickness. The disease nobody understood, unlike the bubonic plague, which was at least a familiar, generationally understood threat. The sweating sickness was something genuinely new and, to contemporary observers, deeply terrifying. It first arrived in England in 1485, the same year Henry's own father won the crown at the Battle of Bosworth Field, and it killed with shocking, almost incomprehensible speed. A person could feel entirely healthy at breakfast and be dead by supper the same evening. The progression was brutal and consistent: headaches, uncontrollable shivering, drenching full-body sweat, chest pain, delirium, and then death, sometimes within a single day of the first symptom appearing. And it did not, as many diseases of the period did, primarily target the poor and malnourished. It appeared, with particular and widely noted cruelty, to strike the young, the wealthy, and the well-fed with disproportionate severity. The very first documented outbreak in 1485 killed several thousand Londoners within just a few weeks, including, according to surviving civic records, 2 Lord Mayors, 6 aldermen, and 3 sheriffs, a death toll among the city's governing class severe enough to leave a lasting impression on an entire generation of English elites. A childhood built around avoiding illness, Henry had been unusually, deliberately overprotected as a child, especially following the death of his older brother Arthur in 1502, an event that suddenly and unexpectedly made the young Henry the direct heir to the English throne. His father, Henry VII, had subsequently shielded his new heir from any possible exposure to illness with an intensity that went well beyond ordinary parental caution. The result was a young king who grew up physically robust and athletically capable, but psychologically shaped in a lasting and consequential way by a genuine terror of disease. A pattern that repeated throughout his adult reign, whenever plague or the sweating sickness appeared. Anywhere in the vicinity of London, Henry would immediately pack up his entire court and flee to the countryside, regardless of the political inconvenience involved. In 1517, an outbreak killed over 400 people in Oxford within a single week. Henry immediately relocated the entire court to Windsor Castle and refused to return until the outbreak had fully passed. Cardinal Wolsey, who remained behind in London to personally manage ongoing government business, actually contracted the disease himself during this period, but managed to survive it. The 1528 outbreak was even more severe. Some English cities reported that as much as half their population had died. Henry left London immediately, relocating to Huntston in Hertfordshire, moving in a small, deliberately isolated, visibly anxious group, from one country house to another as the outbreak spread. When one of Anne Boleyn's own attendant ladies fell visibly ill during this period, the king reportedly panicked and ordered and sent back to her family's estate at Hever Castle, specifically to reduce the risk that she might be carrying the infection herself. The French ambassador at court, observing all of this directly, wrote that when one of the ladies of the chamber developed symptoms of the sweat, the king departed in visible haste and had travelled 12 miles away within a matter of hours. When the danger reached someone he actually loved, Anne herself eventually caught the sweating sickness at Hever during this same outbreak. Henry wrote her a letter expressing genuine personal concern, but sent only his second-best physician to attend to her directly. His own best physician remained at his side instead, a detail that reveals, with unusual clarity, exactly where his priorities settled. Whenever his own personal health was perceived to be at risk, even for the woman he was actively pursuing to become his second wife. Part 3. The contradiction at the center of everything. This deep-seated fear created a genuinely strange, internally contradictory pattern in Henry's overall approach to bathing and personal hygiene. Two conflicting instincts. On one hand, Henry clearly, demonstrably valued personal cleanliness. The construction of the Bain Tower and the parallel plumbing systems he later commissioned at Windsor Castle and Whitehall Palace all prove that he invested genuinely significant money into the physical infrastructure required simply to get clean at a scale almost nobody else in his kingdom could match. On the other hand, the mainstream medical wisdom of his own era told him, with total sincerity and apparent scientific authority, that immersing the body in hot water was one of the most dangerous things a person could actively choose to do. The theory of miasma. Tudor physicians operated broadly under a medical framework known as miasma theory. They believed that disease traveled primarily through bad air, through invisible, poisonous vapors capable of entering the human body, through the nose, the mouth, and crucially, through the open pores of the skin itself. A physician named Thomas Moulton, writing in a widely circulated medical guide from the mid-1500s, specifically warned that hot baths opened the pores of a man's body and allowed venomous air to enter and infect the blood directly. This was not fringe or marginal medical thinking. It was mainstream, broadly accepted medical consensus, roughly equivalent in its cultural authority to a modern doctor advising a patient to wash their hands before eating. Essentially, everyone in Tudor society who had access to any formal medical guidance believed some version of this framework. The compromise Henry settled on, Henry found himself caught for essentially his entire adult life between these two conflicting impulses. His instinct toward personal cleanliness consistently pulled him toward the bath. His genuine terror of disease consistently pushed him away from it. The compromise he ultimately settled into was a kind of deliberately selective, seasonal bathing practice. He took herbal medicinal baths primarily during the winter months, when the sweating sickness was understood to lie seasonally dormant. But when the sweat was actively circulating, typically during the warmer summer months, he avoided the tub almost entirely. Dry cleaning the Tudor way, during those anxious summer months when the disease tended to flare seasonally, Henry relied instead on what Tudor people called dry cleaning, not remotely the modern dry cleaning process, but a specific physical practice, involving vigorously rubbing the entire body with coarse linen cloth. A contemporary Tudor health writer specifically recommended rubbing the body with a coarse linen cloth, first softly and easily, and after that increasing more and more to a hard and swift rubbing, until the flesh did swell and become somewhat ruddy. The underlying theory was that friction against rough linen could draw the body's accumulated toxins out through the pores and trap them physically in the cloth itself, achieving a form of cleansing without the perceived medical danger of actually getting wet. A modern historian tests the theory. Whether this specific approach actually worked in any practical sense is a question a modern social historian named Ruth Goodman decided to test directly. She followed a reconstructed Tudor body cleansing regime for 3 full months, while continuing to live and work within ordinary modern society, skipping showers and baths entirely and relying instead on linen rubbing, regularly changed undergarments, and herbal washing water applied specifically to her face and hands. According to Goodman's own published account of the experiment, nobody around her complained about her personal hygiene or even seemed to particularly notice anything unusual. The linen-based approach, strange as it appears by contemporary standards, was, by her own direct practical experience, apparently considerably more effective at maintaining basic social cleanliness than most modern people would instinctively assume. Part 4. What an actual royal bath looked like. When Henry did take an actual bath, it was never a quick, functional rinse. It was, in every practical sense, a small production requiring hours of dedicated preparation. The preparation. Imagine the specific scene inside the Bain Tower at Hampton Court. Servants would have begun preparing hours in advance of the king's arrival. The charcoal-fed stove in the adjacent room had to be lit and carefully brought up to the correct temperature. Water flowed steadily through the lead pipes to fill the circular wooden tub. Linen sheets were carefully draped along the tub's interior to protect the king's skin from the rough, splintering wood beneath. The additions, Tudor baths, for anyone with the means to afford them, were rarely simply plain water. Henry's baths were consistently infused with combinations of herbs, flowers, and imported exotic ingredients, chosen specifically for both their believed medicinal properties and their pleasant scent. Rosemary, sage, marjoram, chamomile, and orange peel were common, comparatively affordable ingredients. A contemporary household manual from this period, titled Delights for Ladies, provides detailed recipes for preparing this kind of scented bathing water. Luxuries beyond ordinary reach. For someone of Henry's wealth and social standing, the available options extended considerably further than common household herbs. Musk, civet, and rose oil were among the genuine luxury additions available to him. Rose oil in particular was staggeringly expensive by the standards of the period. Producing even a single small vial required the petals of many thousands of individual roses. Giving someone rose oil as a gift was widely considered a significant, deliberately romantic gesture within Tudor court culture. Henry was personally known to be especially fond of it, and his surviving household accounts show regular, repeated purchases of rose oil throughout the entirety of his reign. He also kept pomanders, small, perforated decorative balls filled with perfume and aromatic spices, distributed throughout his private chambers. These were intended to sweeten the surrounding air, and, according to prevailing Tudor medical belief, to actively ward off disease by purifying the miasma, believed to carry infection through the air itself. A palace of contrasts, the king's own private rooms at Hampton Court, as a direct result of all this careful attention, smelled distinctly of rose and musk. The corridors immediately outside those same private rooms told an entirely different olfactory story. Erasmus, the great Dutch scholar who visited England around this general period, famously described English floors as being covered with rushes, beneath which lay what he characterized as an ancient, undisturbed accumulation of beer, grease, bone fragments, spittle, and the accumulated excrement of dogs and cats. Tudor domestic hygiene, considered as a whole society-wide practice, rather than a narrow royal privilege, remained very much a work in progress throughout this period. A circular piece of medical logic, the herbal additions to Henry's bath were also believed to carry genuine medicinal value, or at least Tudor medical practitioners sincerely believed they did. The visibly sick were actually encouraged, under this framework, to bathe more frequently rather than less, because herb-infused bathwater was specifically believed to carry active healing properties. This created one of the more genuinely circular contradictions embedded in Tudor medical theory. Hot water was considered dangerous because it opened the body's pores to disease-carrying vapors, but herb-infused hot water was simultaneously considered healing, because the specific herbs involved were believed to actively counteract that same danger. If that underlying logic seems circular and internally inconsistent on close inspection, that inconsistency is, in essence, an accurate reflection of how 16th century medical reasoning frequently operated. Part 5. The man who managed the king's body. Henry did not bathe alone, and privacy, in anything resembling the modern sense of the word, did not genuinely exist for a Tudor monarch at any point during his reign. Why the king's body was a matter of state. The king's physical body was never understood as merely a private, personal matter. It was, in the most direct and consequential sense, a matter of state. His health affected the royal succession, the broader political stability of the realm, and, by extension, national security itself. Those specific individuals entrusted with attending to his body were, correspondingly, entrusted with actively safeguarding the stability of the entire kingdom. And the single person most intimately involved in the king's daily physical care held one of the strangest formal job titles in the whole of English history: the Groom of the King's Close Stool. What the Close Stool actually was: the Close Stool itself was a portable royal toilet, a padded wooden box containing a chamber pot, upholstered in velvet and sometimes further trimmed with decorative ribbons. The groom holding this specific office was formally responsible for carrying and maintaining this commode, supplying clean water, towels, and a washing basin, and monitoring the king's bowel movements as an ongoing, continuous health assessment. Whether the groom also physically assisted with more intimate aspects of this process remains a matter some historians still debate, based on the surviving, sometimes ambiguous documentary record. But the role, in practice, extended far beyond simple toilet duty in any narrow sense. A position of genuine political power. Under Henry VIII specifically, the Groom of the Stool evolved into one of the most quietly influential men in the entire kingdom. He supervised all of the other servants working within the king's privy chamber, the innermost, most restricted private rooms of the royal apartments. He personally helped the king dress and undress each day. He managed the privy purse, the king's own personal, discretionary spending account, which could run to many thousands of pounds annually on clothing, jewels, gambling, and sporting equipment. He controlled, in practical daily terms, who could and could not enter the king's most private chambers at any given hour. He functioned, in effect, as the king's personal secretary, closest confidant, and ultimate physical gatekeeper. Not a low-born appointment. The men who held this specific title were never low-born household servants in any conventional sense. They were, without exception, sons of established nobility, close personal companions of the king from an early age, and they were richly, tangibly rewarded for their sustained service. Henry's very first Groom of the Stool, Sir William Compton, was one of the king's oldest personal friends, having grown up alongside him from childhood. Compton's personality, by most contemporary accounts, suited the young Henry's own temperament almost perfectly, and the king treated his early court as something closer to a royal household, crossed with a fraternity of close companions, with Compton functioning, in practical terms, as its unofficial social organizer. He received land grants and additional offices from the king, bringing in roughly £2,000 a year, an income roughly equal to that of a leading established nobleman or one of the kingdom's wealthier bishops. Compton would ultimately die of the sweating sickness in 1528, becoming one of the disease's most socially prominent documented victims. The whispered word that shaped policy, courtiers desperate for the king's personal favor would routinely try to cultivate good relations with whoever currently held this position, understanding clearly that a single whispered word in the right ear, offered during an unusually private, informal moment, could genuinely shape government policy or secure a valuable appointment on someone's behalf. People regularly sent the groom personal gifts and even standing pensions, specifically hoping he would put in a favorable word on their behalf, while personally attending the king during his most private daily moments. A dangerous kind of intimacy, being the specific man who handled the royal chamber pot was, in a genuinely paradoxical way, one of the fastest available routes to real political influence in Tudor England, and not without corresponding risk. Sir Henry Norris, who eventually succeeded Compton as Groom of the Stool, was executed in 1536, formally accused of committing adultery with Queen Anne Boleyn, on charges that most historians today regard as almost certainly fabricated, for largely unrelated political reasons. His unusually close, constant physical proximity to the king made the accusation against him particularly explosive and, ultimately, politically useful to his enemies. Proximity to power brought genuine privilege and enormous influence, but it also brought genuine, sometimes lethal danger. The same daily intimacy that elevated a groom to real political consequence could, under the wrong political circumstances, just as easily destroy him. Part 6. A Body in Decline. By the late 1530s, Henry's overall relationship with bathing had begun, out of physical necessity rather than changing belief, to shift once again. The accident that changed everything, his body was changing as well, and not for the better in any respect. The athletic, energetic young king who had once jousted, hunted, and danced with what contemporaries described as seemingly limitless physical energy was, by this point, simply gone. In January of 1536, Henry suffered a serious jousting accident at Greenwich that left him unconscious for approximately 2 hours, a genuinely alarming medical episode by the standards of the period. His already previously injured leg never properly recovered from this specific incident. Chronic wounds that never fully healed, chronic ulcers subsequently developed on both of his legs, most likely resulting from a combination of underlying venous disease and the lasting damage from his original jousting injuries. These wounds would open and close entirely unpredictably for the remainder of his life, sometimes sealing shut and causing agonizing internal pain along with recurring fever, sometimes weeping openly and emitting an odor that his own courtiers, by multiple surviving accounts, struggled genuinely to ignore in his presence. A body that made hygiene both harder and more urgent, as Henry's own body weight climbed toward an estimated 300 pounds in his final years. The physical act of bathing became simultaneously more difficult to manage and more medically necessary. His advancing obesity caused excessive general sweating, which, combined with the heavy layers of wool and silk that Tudor court fashion demanded regardless of body size, created persistent, difficult-to-mask body odor. His waist measurement reportedly reached 54 inches by his final years. His chronic leg wounds contributed their own distinct, unpleasant smell to this same general problem. The ulcers would periodically seal over entirely, trapping infection directly beneath the skin, and the resulting internal pressure would cause fevers severe enough that his own courtiers genuinely feared for his survival during these episodes. When the wounds eventually reopened on their own, the immediate relief from pain was significant, but the resulting odor proved consistently difficult to disguise through ordinary means. Perfumes and scented oils, accordingly, became considerably less of an occasional luxury and considerably more of a genuine daily necessity. Henry's personal expense records show steadily increasing purchases of rose oil, musk, and other fragrances as he continued to age. When the doctors changed their minds, and here is where the Tudor medical establishment performed what amounts to a genuine, documented about-face. the same physicians who had once sincerely warned Henry that hot baths could invite deadly disease directly into his body, now began actively prescribing medicinal herbal baths specifically for his legs. The underlying medical logic had genuinely shifted. Henry's wounds were, by this point, so severe, so consistently painful, and so resistant to every other available treatment, that the potential healing properties attributed to herbal bathing water were judged by his own physicians to outweigh the older theoretical risk of dangerously opened pores. The architectural historian Simon Thurley, who has studied Henry's palaces in considerable scholarly depth, notes that the king took medicinal herbal baths each winter during this later period, soaking his damaged legs in warm water infused with musk and various healing herbs. The practice brought genuine, if temporary, relief from his pain, though nothing available to Tudor medicine could actually halt the underlying progression of the disease itself. A third bathhouse built for a failing body. In the early 1540s, Henry commissioned yet another private bathroom, this time at Whitehall Palace in London. According to Simon Thurley's research, this particular installation was even more luxurious and technically sophisticated than the earlier Hampton Court version. The plumbing was more advanced, the surrounding decoration considerably richer, and the physical space itself deliberately more accommodating for a king, whose body now required additional room and additional physical assistance simply to use it. Henry also continued to maintain separate bathing facilities at Windsor Castle, giving him private bathing access at 3 of his most frequently used royal residences simultaneously. For a man whose body was visibly failing him, who could no longer walk any real distance without direct assistance, and who required a mechanical wheeled device simply to be moved between floors, the bath had become, by his final years, one of the very few remaining genuine physical comforts still available to him. Part 7. How everyone else actually bathed. While the king soaked in herb-scented water piped in through lead conduits from a spring miles away, the vast majority of his own subjects experienced the entire concept of bath time in a dramatically different way. An ordinary family's ordeal. For an ordinary Tudor family, taking a bath was, in the most literal sense, an ordeal requiring genuine, sustained effort. The typical household arrangement involved a large, barrel-like wooden tub that had to be physically dragged near the fireplace before use. Someone in the household, usually a woman, would then make repeated trips to the nearest well or stream, hauling back individual buckets of cold water by hand. Each bucket then had to be separately heated over the household fire before being poured into the tub. The entire process could easily take several hours from start to finish, and locating genuinely clean water in a typical Tudor village presented its own significant, ongoing challenge. Wells could become contaminated relatively easily, and rivers were frequently polluted with human waste from upstream settlements. A frequently cited letter attributed to Elizabeth of York, Henry's own grandmother, reportedly warned Catherine of Aragon's mother that water in England was not safely drinkable, and that even where it might technically be safe, the local climate would not generally allow for the comfortable drinking of it, a claim commonly repeated in popular accounts of the period, though its exact original documentation deserves some caution. English ale and wine were, in any case, broadly considered far safer everyday beverages than plain water throughout this period, a genuine reflection of the general state of English water quality. Sharing the same water because of the considerable ongoing effort required. Simply to fill a household tub, the resulting bath water was routinely shared among the entire family. The father bathed first, followed by the mother, followed by the children, in descending order from oldest to youngest. By the time the smallest child in the household finally climbed into the tub, the water itself was frequently cold and visibly filthy, a household practice that some popular accounts connect to the origin of the Old English saying about not throwing out the baby with the bath water. For poorer families living in more rural, isolated villages, even this comparatively involved process was often too much sustained effort to undertake on a genuinely regular basis. A simple dip in the nearest available river frequently served the same basic purpose instead, weather and season permitting. But even among ordinary commoners, some form of daily washing remained entirely normal practice. Tudor people themselves drew a meaningful practical distinction between washing and bathing. Washing meant cleaning the face, hands, and armpits with a damp cloth and a basin of water, a task performed by nearly everyone each morning without exception. Bathing meant full bodily immersion in a tub, a considerably larger undertaking that happened far less frequently. Most ordinary Tudor people practiced the former quite religiously, even if they rarely managed the latter more than occasionally. The rise and fall of public bathhouses. In the earlier Tudor period, public bathhouses did exist in a number of English towns, a tradition originally brought back from the Eastern Mediterranean by returning Crusaders generations earlier. The institutional church, however, viewed these public bathhouses with considerable ongoing suspicion, arguing that excessive heat could inflame the senses in dangerous ways, and that bathing nude in mixed or public settings was itself a sign of vanity or outright sexual corruption. Many Tudor bathers, as a compromise, wore their shirts directly into the water to preserve at least a basic standard of public modesty. Gradually, over the course of the 16th century, these public bathhouses fell out of general favor, and by the mid-1500s, the great majority had permanently closed. Soap and grooming available across every class, soap itself, unlike a genuinely functional home bathing setup, was widely available across essentially every social class in Tudor England. For the wealthy, soaps were typically made from vegetable oils, and specifically scented with lavender, sage, or rose water. For poorer households, soap was considerably cruder in composition, made from rendered animal fat combined with wood ash, but it still cleaned effectively enough for ordinary use. The genuine dividing line between rich and poor in practical terms was rarely whether a person could get clean at all, but rather how pleasant and comfortable the overall experience of getting clean happened to be. Tudor people of every social class also used a genuinely surprising array of dedicated personal grooming tools. Ear scoops, toothpicks, and small nail cleaners were all common personal accessories, sometimes combined into a single compact multi-tool that hung from a chain or sat inside a small personal pouch. Some of these tools were crafted from silver and served as visible status symbols, nearly as much as functional hygiene devices. Contemporary etiquette manuals strongly advised against picking one's ears or cleaning one's teeth, with bare fingers at the dinner table specifically. Advice that itself reveals a good deal about what people were, in practice, actually doing before being told firmly not to. Part 8. When foreign courts changed English habits. The arrival of Catherine of Aragon at the English court in 1501 quietly began shifting broader English attitudes toward hygiene in ways that would ultimately outlast her own marriage to Henry by several decades. A more advanced bathing culture arrives from Spain. Catherine came from the Spanish royal court, where bathing culture was considerably more developed, shaped by centuries of preceding Moorish architectural and cultural tradition across the Iberian Peninsula. The thermal baths and engineered, man-made water channels she had grown up around in Spain represented a genuinely different world from prevailing English domestic habits at the time. Her own attendant Spanish ladies-in-waiting were reportedly shocked by certain specific English court customs upon their arrival, particularly the casual tendency of some men at court to relieve themselves directly into palace fireplaces, rather than seeking out a proper garderobe, the Tudor-era term for a built-in latrine. Catherine's ongoing cultural influence, combined with Henry's later personal investments in expanded palace plumbing, gradually improved these specific conditions over the following decades. By the end of Henry's reign, the casual use of fireplaces as informal urinals had been largely phased out across the royal palaces, replaced instead by proper garderobes built directly into the palace walls. Hampton Court alone contained a dedicated structure known as the Great House of Easement, which housed 28 separate lavatories arranged in 2 parallel rows of 14 across 2 full floors, with waste dropping into a collection pit that was cleaned out annually directly into the river by contracted workers who were, for understandable reasons, partly compensated for this specific task in rum. A German bride and a difficult first meeting, the contrast in prevailing hygiene standards across different European royal courts could also carry genuine personal consequences. When Henry became engaged to marry Anne of Cleves in 1540, his 4th wife, she arrived at the English court from a German court where regular bathing was, by several popular contemporary and later accounts, considerably less common than at the English or Spanish courts. Her own advisors reportedly had to actively encourage her to bathe before her first formal meeting with the king. When Henry finally met Anne in person, he was, by his own later account, immediately and strongly repulsed by her appearance, confiding to his groom of the Stool and other close personal servants that he genuinely doubted her virtue based specifically on her physical appearance. Whether her personal hygiene habits played any specific, direct role in his documented revulsion remains genuinely debated among historians working with the surviving, sometimes contradictory sources. But the underlying marriage itself was never consummated, and Henry had it formally annulled within roughly 6 months of the wedding. A sister known for unusually advanced habits, Henry's own younger sister, Mary Tudor, who briefly became Queen of France through her marriage to Louis XII, was separately noted for unusually advanced personal hygiene practices by the standards of the period. When she arrived at the French court in 1514, she reportedly surprised the assembled French courtiers by traveling with her own personal collection of toothbrushes, a detail preserved primarily through later anecdotal tradition rather than a single confirmed primary source. though the fact that this specific detail was considered remarkable enough to be recorded and repeated at all tells us something genuine about how unusual dedicated dental hygiene tools remained, even among European royalty during this particular period. Part 9. Teeth, breath, and a queen's famous nose. Teeth were, somewhat counterintuitively, one specific area where Tudor people may have actually held a genuine health advantage over several later generations. A lucky accident of economics, because refined sugar remained genuinely expensive and comparatively rare across most of English society during the early 1500s. The majority of ordinary people's teeth stayed in reasonably decent condition throughout their entire lives, simply due to limited sugar exposure rather than any particular dental practice. Archaeological examination of Princess Mary Tudor's own surviving skeletal remains revealed what forensic scientists have described as a genuinely good set of teeth for the period. Anne Boleyn was similarly noted by contemporaries for generally healthy teeth, aside from one slightly protruding front tooth frequently mentioned in physical descriptions of her. Henry himself was considerably less fortunate in this specific respect. His well-documented personal love of sugar and sweet-prepared foods took a visible cumulative toll over time, and by middle age, he had lost a significant number of his own natural teeth and suffered from chronic, difficult-to-disguise bad breath as a direct consequence. A daughter with a different approach entirely. Elizabeth I, Henry's daughter through his marriage to Anne Boleyn, took a notably different overall approach to bathing than her own father had. She is widely reported, in popular historical retelling, to have declared that she bathed once a month whether she needed it or not, a frequently repeated line whose exact original documentary source remains genuinely uncertain, and which many careful historians treat with real caution, as likely folklore rather than a verified direct quotation. What is somewhat better documented is that Elizabeth did apparently inherit her father's own famously sharp sensitivity to unpleasant smells. One of her courtiers, the Earl of Oxford, was reportedly so thoroughly mortified after accidentally passing gas in the Queen's presence that he removed himself from court entirely for 7 years. When he eventually returned, Elizabeth reportedly greeted him personally with the line, "My lord, I had forgot the fart," an anecdote preserved primarily through the 17th century writer John Aubrey's later collection of court gossip and biographical sketches, compiled roughly a century after the events it describes, and therefore best understood as a well-preserved piece of court folklore, rather than a strictly contemporary eyewitness record. Part 10. The Final Years. Henry VIII died on the 28th of January, 1547, at the age of 55. The groom who delivered the final news. In his final years, his groom of the Stool, Sir Anthony Denny, had become arguably the second most genuinely influential individual in the entire kingdom. Denny controlled direct access to the dying king during his final period of declining health. He personally wielded Henry's own dry stamp, the mechanical signature device authorizing him to formally approve or reject official documents directly in the king's own name, at a point when Henry's physical condition made his own direct involvement increasingly difficult. Denny helped draft the king's final royal will. And when the actual end finally arrived, it was Denny who personally told Henry that he was dying and needed to prepare himself to meet God, a task few other men at court would have had either the standing or the personal courage to perform. The specific man whose formal job had once involved monitoring the king's bowel movements and supplying wash towels had become, over the intervening decades, the very person who delivered the single most consequential piece of news in the entire Tudor succession. What the bathhouses ultimately represented, Henry's bathhouses at Hampton Court, Windsor and Whitehall together represented a king's genuinely stubborn, decades-long insistence on personal cleanliness, sustained throughout an era in which his own medical establishment sincerely told him that cleanliness itself might actively kill him. The hot water his doctors once warned could let deadly plague seep directly through his own pores, eventually became the very same hot water they later prescribed as active medical treatment for his festering wounds. The servants who attended his most intimate, private physical moments became, in more than one documented case, among the most politically influential figures of the entire era. And the lead pipes that carried spring water 3 miles underground, and then 2 full stories up through Hampton Court Palace stood, for generations afterward, as a genuine feat of practical engineering that would not be meaningfully matched in most ordinary English homes, until the Victorian era, more than 300 years later. Tudor England was, in most respects, filthier, stranger, and considerably more internally contradictory than most people casually imagine it to have been. But it was never, at any point, a world entirely without genuine standards of its own. People across every social class cared, in their own specific way, about how they smelled and how they were perceived by those around them. They invested real money and real effort into soaps, perfumes, dedicated grooming tools, and personal hygiene rituals, shaped directly by what they genuinely knew, and just as significantly, by what they genuinely and sincerely believed to be true, about disease, the body, and the invisible forces they thought moved between them. And at the very top of that entire world, inside a linen-lined wooden tub fed by lead pipes running silently under the Thames, sat a king soaking in rosemary-scented water, while a titled nobleman stood quietly nearby, ready with a towel caught for the whole of his adult life, between the 2 competing convictions. That clean water might save him, and that clean water might just as easily kill him, never quite able to resolve which one was actually true. The detail I keep coming back to, researching this specific period, is the medical reversal itself. The fact that the exact same physicians who spent decades warning Henry that hot water could open his pores and let disease directly into his blood, eventually turned around and prescribed that same hot water as treatment for his legs, without ever appearing to notice, in the surviving record, quite how completely their own underlying theory had just contradicted itself. I think that reversal captures something genuinely important about how people actually hold beliefs under real pressure, not just in the 16th century, but generally. Henry didn't abandon his fear of disease when his legs started failing him. His doctors didn't formally renounce miasma theory when they started prescribing herbal baths. Nobody involved sat down and resolved the underlying contradiction on paper. They simply adjusted the specific application of the belief until it fit the immediate, urgent problem directly in front of them, and left the deeper inconsistency quietly unexamined underneath. Researching Tudor daily life for this channel, that's the detail that stays with me. longer than the executions, longer than the political intrigue. Around who controlled access to the king's own privy chamber. It's the plain, human image of a genuinely powerful man, at the absolute height of his political authority, still fundamentally afraid of his own bathwater, spending decades and a small fortune building some of the most advanced private plumbing in Europe, specifically so he could feel clean, without ever fully resolving in his own mind whether feeling clean was actually safe. I'll see you in the dark.